Super Committee's failure could also translate as a failure to extend the payroll tax cuts. They're due to expire at the end of the year, and many look to the Super Committee to include an extension of the payroll tax cuts in their plan. Now, here to tell us if tax hikes are inevitable are the freedom fighters, radio host Nancy Skinner, Reason Magazine editor-in-chief Matt Welch, and Fox Business energy analyst Phil Flynn. Nancy, first to you. What do you think?
Well, it's funny how you call extending the payroll tax cuts a tax hike, okay? You know, the whole idea of the Bush tax cuts, they had a sunset clause, EMAC, and what is that? That means that if we have deficits, we're going to go back to where they were. Now, so what's the difference between that sunset clause and what we did with payroll tax cuts to allow people to have more consumer spending in their pocket, which is 80% of GDP? What is the difference? You want to keep tax cuts extended for 2 years on the top 1%, but when it comes to payroll tax, all of a sudden you're going to scare the American public.
Okay, no, we're not scaring the American public. Hang on, sit tight. No, Nancy, you're making an important point there, and I appreciate it. When we talk about the payroll tax cut going away, Phil Flynn, that essentially means we are going to pay more in taxes. And if we're going to raise taxes on the upper bracket, Phil, to your mind, have you seen any lockbox erected by Congress to store those revenues from the tax hikes so they could spend it wisely and appropriately down there in Congress? Phil Flynn?
Wisely and appropriately in Congress in the same sentence? I don't think so. I mean, no. The bottom line is that this is a tax cut that actually helped all Americans. It really was. I mean, it put more money in the average American's pocket, and that's what everybody's screaming for. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, and because of this, the Super Committee, they're going to go away. That's going to be less money in the economy, and that's it. Now, if you compromise that on top of that, and you let the Bush tax cuts expire, this is going to create even more of an issue. So what we're basically doing is we're taking more money out of the economy, putting it into the government coffers, and you know what they're going to end up doing it with. I don't. But
Matt, Nancy makes an important point. Look, the payroll tax cuts, people want that money back in their pocket. But the issue is, I don't want to get into a fight about the Bush tax cuts because who knows if they're going to expire. But really the issue is, can we do tax reform? Can we do it adequately with the U.S. government saying, look, we are going to stop spending. We are going to stop, out of control, reckless spending at a time when we're looking at Harry Reid in Congress and we're looking at Charlie Rangel. Can they do tax reform? That's like putting the cat among the pigeons. I mean, can they do it? Can we get it done correctly down there in Congress?
Absolutely not. There's no chance. There's not a single signal coming out of Capitol Hill that real tax reform is on the table. And in fact, this payroll tax cut, which did put more money in people's pockets, but it's also a sign of one of the problems. The problem is that we're addicted to these sort of short-term measures. We haven't passed a budget in 2.5 years, but we can do these little short-term things. They don't help the economy. Short-term tax cuts don't allow people to plan. It shows that we jury-rig the tax code every political season as we see fit, instead of simplifying, getting rid of things like the mortgage interest deduction, simplifying and flattening, and then reducing, and specifically reducing government so that we can get the actual payment for the government that we have in line with the government that we get.
All right, gang. Next up. All right, Nancy, final word.
Increasing the wealthiest. So you would be against increasing the wealthiest tax cuts for the 1%.
You know what? I don't believe you raise taxes at all until you rein in spending, but that's for argument for another day. And we'll talk about trickle-down Obamonomics for another day. But here's another topic for you. It's a conservative candidate's worst nightmare. The 2012 GOP race under the microscope now more than ever. The Super Committee's failure means Congress now faces $1.2 trillion in automatic spending cuts that will hit the Defense Department harder than any other agency. So now the GOP field must choose between the party's top causes: shrink the size of government or shrink the military budget. Can conservative stalwarts in Congress stomach the idea of real fiscal responsibility? What do you think? Take that, Phil.
Well, I think the bottom line is that it's going to come down to the election. But, you know, the same issue goes back to the tax issue that we were just talking about. The bottom line is, how do you fix the tax system? Nancy's point that we should just, tax the richest 1%, that isn't going to solve the problem. There's not enough money to do that. The bottom line is you need structural reform. That's why Mr. Kaine originally took off on the Republican field, because he has a plan. Whether it's good or bad, it's across the board.
Okay,
that's what we need is tax reform.
You know, Matt, U.S. military spending, by some research, accounts for 43% of military spending for the entire world, $724 billion in 2012. I never heard of any of the military contractors like Lockheed ever needing, or Boeing, or Grumman having to get a government bailout. They got that tin cup going. We get it. I've got soldiers in my family. We want to support our military. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's got to be some way to get some, savings out of the defense budget. No, Matt?
Absolutely, and it really shows that there's a huge gap between conservative and Republican rhetoric and their actual record of governance. They don't want to cut military spending. Ron Paul is the only candidate who is serious, or a serious candidate who is serious about cutting military spending, which he rightly shows is different than defense spending. We've been funding our wars through emergency supplementals since 2002, and just shoving anything under these bills in the name of supporting the troops. If any Republican out there wants to be actually serious about this topic and have any credibility after 8 years of a terrible George W. Bush government expansion, then you have to cut military spending, period.
All right, Nancy Skinner, do you agree with Ron Paul? We got to pare back the defense budget.
I'm just going to have fun watching the GOP candidates have to choose between two sacred cows. Thank goodness there's not a third, or Rick Perry would be in a lot of trouble.
Well, do you agree with Ron Paul? Now, answer the question, Nancy. Do you agree with Ron Paul?
Yes, absolutely. Our military budget should be cut. We don't need bases continuing in Japan and Germany, and there are outdated systems like Trident missiles and all kinds of too many aircraft carriers when we live in an asymmetrical new warfare environment. Absolutely. But you know what? You got to choose. They want to hold on to tax cuts for the rich, and they don't want to cut the military.
Nancy, are you ever for across-the-board spending cuts? Would you ever agree, Nancy, you got to cut spending before you ask for one more nickel out of the American people? Nancy Skinner.
That's what this whole super committee was supposed to do. Come together and find cuts in every area of government,
Eureka! Nancy Skinner agrees. Don't raise taxes. Stop taking money from the American people. You cut spending first. We're going to leave it there. Nancy, I got you. Next time around, you're going to get me back. I know it. Next time, Nancy Skinner. Stay tuned. The Freedom Fighters return later in the show to grill the TSA on